Welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the Creator Economy for B2B. Welcome today to Not Just Ads. I'm delighted to be joined by Jarah Burke. Jarah has a wide range of experience in the marketing space. She's currently leading marketing at VP of Marketing at Measured. Measured helps clients optimize the effectiveness of how they measure media effectively in their marketing organization. Jarah, thanks very much for joining us today. There's a number of topics I'm really excited to discuss with you, so it's great to have you on the show.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me on. These are my favorite things to talk about, and so I'm always excited to have a platform to do that.
Great. Well, maybe you could take us a little bit back before we kind of get into the details, but like, how did you get into marketing, and what kind of led you into it?
Yeah, so even as a little kid, I always wanted to be in marketing. I used to watch old reruns of the show Bewitched, and the husband does advertising. It was very specific as a kid. I didn't want to be in marketing. I wanted to be in advertising. And coupling that with my favorite game growing up was Monopoly. Here I am 30 some years later playing Monopoly for advertisers. And that's the side of measurement that I get to do and the part that I really love. I've been agency side, I've been in-house, and I've actually worked with Measured before I worked at Measured. And I started to see how well the tool worked for brands that wanted to use that principle of penny saved is penny earned and reinvest dollars where they would be more effective. And I saw it work across upwards of 10 clients when I was on the agency side and thought what they're doing is really cool and really special. And my favorite part of the job, the media planning, the budget optimization, and the detective work of figuring out what move is going to get me the outcome that I want. And so that's how I ended up at Measured.
Great. For some of the audience that don't know Measured, could you just give us a little bit of an overview where you sit, what kind of clients you serve?
Yeah. So Measured is an incrementality measurement tool. There's a couple components to it. So the first is an agile media mix model that's using a Bayesian statistical model that's correlating fluctuations in ad spend with fluctuations in your primary KPI, typically revenue, sometimes new customers, lead sessions, whatever you might want it to be, depending on your business model. And therefore inferring based on correlation, the effect of your media on your desired outcome. But we all know from high school, correlation isn't causation. It just waves a big red flag, says, look over here. And so in order to calibrate a media mix model, even a really good agile media mix model, you need to have testing and experimentation. And what that is in its simplest form, holdout tests. You have a control market and a test market. You affect a change to the test market. You don't do it to the control market. And then you measure the change of what happened. And that's going to prove not just with correlation, but with causation, and give the model a data point with which to operate. And so it will help calibrate the media mix model. So we're not using cookies to try and track or follow people around the internet or recreate some type of customer journey. It's truly just a cause and effect of your media. And with that, you can use it to refine your investment strategies. A data scientist would be very displeased with me if I called it attribution, because attribution means we're attributing this to that. But for all intents and purposes, we're creating a better form of attribution.
Yeah. What do you see how things have changed now over the last, say, 5 years or so? Because I think in the last, like if we roll back to maybe 10 years ago, there was like always the last touch discussion. And I think with media mix modeling, it's evolved a lot more now. What do you see are kind of like some of the myths around that people that still are there, but that are maybe from some of the tests they're not exactly accurate? Any trends that you see in that particular space?
Yeah. So finance teams rely very heavily on last click and platforms like Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics, where for their forecasting process, they need sessions, they need spend, they need orders, they need revenue. And that's how forecasting is done today by most finance teams. And so as a result, and also because it's just so easy and simple, they'll rely on last click attribution pretty heavily. And so it's an almost everyday occurrence that I'll get on a phone with a CFO and goes, but wait, like, this looks so good. Why aren't we just spending all of our budget in brand search, brand shopping, retargeting, retention, those types of tactics? And it's like, you got to walk that back. The analogy that I
Yeah.
always use is growing up, I played soccer and I started when I was 4 years old. And so we're just a bunch of kids all swarming the ball. My dad called it beehive soccer. And he would stand up in the stands and pace back and forth, yelling at us to spread out and stay in position. And that's also what your media strategy needs to do. It's not every player's job to score a goal. If your goalie is scoring a goal, that's actually a problem, then it is a good thing. It means something somewhere has gone really wrong. And the same is true for media strategy. But so often it's easier just to say, how good is that player? Well, how many goals did they score? And what measured does is it says, hey, if you take out the goalie, if you add an extra midfielder, seeing what team formulation and what plays actually drive the outcome that you want.
What do you see when media mix modeling, some of the research that you do, what actually gets finance on board looking at other things, whether it's like kind of how you can kind of frame things of like, even whether it's like, say, future cash flows or doing branding that's going to give you potentially higher purchasing power or things like that. Is there anything that from the data that you see that can kind of tie into that narrative that's effective for finance and the data backs it up? Or is it still something that it very much depends on the context of the business and the sales cycle and so on?
Yeah. There are two primary approaches. The first one is looking at marginal incremental orders or leads, and that is super helpful. So when you have a media mix model that's calibrated by incrementality experience, what you get is what data science will call a response curve. Marketers will call it a diminishing returns curve. And you can see typically the first dollar you spent has the highest impact, the last dollar you spent has the lowest impact. And so using that response curve, you can start to see some channels are going to have a very effective initial contribution, like brand retargeting, retention.
Yeah.
Those are all going to have, like, the first batch is going to be so strong that when you're looking at the overall CPA or
Yeah.
CPL of that tactic, it's going to be like, I don't know, let's call it 5 or 6. But the marginal cost per lead, the value of the last dollars you spent acquiring those leads could be like 4 or 5 times, maybe even more, what the first batch cost you. The best example would be, let's say you get 10 leads. The first one is $1, the second one's $2, the third one's $3, so on. You spent $55 on leads. Your cost per lead is going to be $5, but the last lead you got cost you 10. And
Yeah.
so being able to see that in a graph and then say, hey, where the next dollar you spend or the last dollar you want to optimize, do you want to spend it where it's costing you $10 per lead or somewhere where the blended CPA of that campaign is maybe $7, but the marginal is 8?
Yeah. Do you see then in those cases what actually drives up that cost? Is it creative or is it like audience fatigue, or what do you see that actually drives up the higher cost and it becomes less efficient in those cases?
So channels that experience the highest rate of diminishing returns are going to be finite or custom audiences in some way. So any customer captured audience, retargeting, retention, brand, where there's a limited pool of people, you're going to see very strong efficiency initially, and then you'll see it fall off a cliff.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
because you saturated that audience. And so the number one platform metric that you can look to is frequency. Frequency of about X per 7 days per audience per channel is what you're looking for. Anything over that, you're likely just wasting that spend.
Yeah, it's oversaturation. And
Mhm.
is that across the board, do you think, then as well, across all channels, or does it depend really on the channel?
A lot of channels, specifically programmatic channels, will say like, oh, it's got to be way higher. From the incrementality testing that I've done, rules are made to be broken, but it's really where that magic sweet spot is. You might get more conversions at 3x, but the marginal cost of those orders is likely not worth it for your business. Because here's the
Yeah.
challenge. There are some people that log on to onto the internet, use the internet way more frequently than others. And so the people that log on more frequently are going to have a higher frequency than 2x, and the platform's going to report on a blended frequency. Then there are people that don't log on so often, and so they're not necessarily getting that 2x. To get everyone in your audience to a 2x, you're going to have some people that are like 12x. And so
Yeah.
the marginal cost of getting those people that don't log on or don't use social media or these platforms as often isn't likely
It's
going to be
smaller.
worth it. business.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'd love to get your thoughts as well, because in B2B we hear a lot of this research from Ehrenberg Bass in Australia and say the IPA and some of these, that I was always like 95% of your buyers are not in market, so only 5% are. So you need to go after that 5%. And this is a very broad statement, because it's like, okay, we're assuming that in a B2B sales cycle, everything is more than 6 months and it's up to 18 months. But yes, in some cases that's true, but I don't think it's always just applicable to every sector. But I just wonder, from what you see brand and performance play in some of the sectors that you look at, do you kind of see something like that, whereby if people have brand activation on, that's kind of like future cash flows potentially, but it's like how they actually report on the effectiveness of that over time. Do you think the data backs that up? If you're marketing to those people, once they come in market, then you'll win because you'll have more market share with the mental availability? Or does it really kind of depend on who you're targeting and what the sales cycle is?
So I would say first, it depends on the position that your business is in. Like,
Yeah.
what is your cash flow and what is your runway, and how long can you wait to get your investment back on advertising? But then after that question is answered, and assuming that you have the capital to advertise to people that are not in market at that time, specifically if you started to saturate that 5% that are in market, then yeah, the best place to do that is going to be with people that aren't in market. I'll give you an example. A shoe brand that I work with, they worked with in the past. They were shoes for nurses, and there's 10 million nurses in the United States. All of the nurses heard about the shoes, and their performance just hit a wall. Whereas, like, now they have to convince someone to come over who's loyal to another shoe brand, and
Yeah.
that's so much more challenging and so much more expensive, rather than adapting their messaging, which is what they ended up doing pretty successfully, to say, hey, we're going to go after people that need similar things to what a nurse does, whether it's comfort, stability, support, water resistance, all of those types of things, or people that might potentially like be moving into a nurse's role in the next few years. And so I think that, not a B2B example particularly, but that type of mentality can work for B2B.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. How do you see then? They talk a lot as well about like kind of category entry points and people, owning the terminology around and even creating their own categories in some cases. From a measurement standpoint and kind of a media point of view, do you see the brands that actually go down that route own a specific category within a segment? Obviously, it's costly, I guess, to kind of set it up and kind of become the category leader. But do you see that that's like kind of an effective play in the long term, or is it more like it actually can be quite risky, because if it doesn't go right, you're still competing in another category if you haven't successfully created like your own category?
Yeah. I mean, I will go with the no risk, no reward. It
Yeah.
is a risk to try and invent new terms. I'll give you an example that is from incrementality testing. Incrementality testing companies have been trying to make causal impact into a phrase that's commonly used, but it looks like casual impact
Okay.
on paper. Like, it's just the U and the
Yeah, yeah,
A
yeah.
in the word. And so, as much as we're trying to make that happen, because correlation, causation, all
Yeah.
like, it makes so much sense when you're inside of
Yeah.
incrementality testing, but when you're outside, it's like,
Yeah.
well, I don't want my measurement to be casual. I prefer
Yeah,
that
yeah,
it's
yeah.
advanced, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, in that way, it is a high risk, but there are people that own terms in the space, and that has been really impactful, because a lot of times businesses and creating terms, it can feel a lot to me like wine tasting. Where
Yep.
it's like you go to one winery, they say, hey, all of our grape, we use only grapes here, and, steel, bent, whatever, all of their methodology. And you're like, wow, this is pretty great. And then you go to the next winery on your wine tasting tour, and they say, well, we use only the best grapes. So we source them from all of these different vineyards. And it's like, it's just the way that you're positioning
Yeah.
what you're doing and whether and how it works. And so that can be very effective in the market, just like it is with wine tasting. And it can also cause a lot of confusion, where the cheapest players might be able to get into the space because they say, hey, we're using synthetic controls. And the big guys are saying, hey, we're using synthetic controls. It's the same word without understanding the underlying data science behind it. You're not actually going to know what the difference is. And so I think it can work very much to people's advantage to have terms that they own in the space, because then they're able to say, hey, this is something we do that no one else does.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's a long-term play, though. I would imagine, like, actually getting people to first recognize you and that you're associated with that term, and then have the positioning in place that you are kind of, maybe for a want of a better word, a thought leader or a subject matter expert, or around that particular word.
Yeah.
One of the things you touched on there was around positioning as well. And like, for how you see it now, and one of the trends as well, and you mentioned it there, is around synthetic data. What are you seeing around that area? Because we actually have it. We two people from B2BI and LinkedIn started a company, Evidenza, where they're doing a lot of stuff around. They do a lot of research for B2B companies on market research based on synthetic data. I think there's a number of companies in the space, but specifically they focus on B2B. But from what you've seen in your space, is it a trend that more companies are leaning into? And I guess, is it effective, really, from what you've seen, looking at like how you could measure the effectiveness against that audience versus then before activating on media? Or what's from what you've seen kind of a best play, how to use synthetic data to get a more accurate insight at a faster way if you're going to market?
Yeah. So the way that Measured uses synthetic data is a little bit different from like testing a go-to-market strategy. The way that we're using it is in our geo tests for test and control methodology. So back like Mad Men days, and a lot of the marketing agencies that do incrementality experiments, they'll call them match market tests. And that is specifically nuanced and different from what Measured does. But essentially, they'll say, here's this market grouping and that market grouping. This market grouping is 50% of that. So then when we run the test where we do the treatment here, we're just going to multiply what happened in this other market by 50% and then subtract it from what actually happened in
Yeah.
the market where we had the test. And then there's your outcome. And so it's literally matching markets. Then the challenge there, though, is states have different weather patterns. They have different population density. There's all these different factors that make these states that, even if they perform relatively similarly, they're not close enough to make sure that the test has a statistical power that it needs to give you really strong results. And so what Measure does is we use weighted synthetic controls based on actual markets. So there's synthetic data in there that is helping us predict how accurately the test and control markets mirror each other, not only looking back at a history of time, but then also during the test period itself. So that's the way that we're using it, and we're using it very effectively. It's taken our minimum detectable effect. So Measured's able to do tests in our test cells are typically about 10% of the national composition, and our minimum detectable lift is usually about 2 to depending on the season. And so it's been very helpful in limiting the risk and the downside of a holdout test where you're
Yeah.
stopping some might be impactful. It makes the impact to total revenue estimated to usually be like less than 1%.
Okay. Right. And I guess there's a big saving and efficiency, like before traditionally, how you get the research out and feedback and everything. The synthetic data, I guess it's much faster, no?
You know what? I can't speak to that directly, but
Yeah.
it works very quickly on my side from the
Yeah,
client
yeah.
services perspective. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I like
No,
it
it's
from that perspective. It seems very quick.
yeah. No, it's an interesting space though. I think it's something whereby it's evolving so fast as well. What else are you seeing, like from your point of view of what else are brands, whether it's B2C or B2B, like kind of on the creative aspect? Because I think I'm paraphrasing his phrase now, but Rory Sutherland from Ogilvy, you're probably aware of him. He's a number of books out and stuff. I think he mentioned, he was like, if people can be as effective, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but essentially it was like, if you can be effective as with media as we can with creativity, creative agencies would be like the next Google or something, but it's just that creative is not as scalable. I think one of the things of what a lot of people talk about is actually creative does have a big factor, memorability and kind of that compounding effect and so on. But when you look at it from a media standpoint, what are some of the things that you see? And you talked about it before, diminishing returns, but Are there other ways of like how people should look at their creative and how, whether it's to keep it in market long enough and to kind of like go, actually, no, we need to keep it in market X amount of time, or certain signals to say, no, it needs to be rotated, or like, what do you see brands that look at it and that are most effective? What way do they look at it?
Yeah. Such a good question. There's so many parts to that. So, the first part is the most effective creative type across the board at this point is really raw, lo fi, user generated content or influencer content. And a lot of brands really struggle with that, both D2C and I'm sure B2B as well, because a piece of clothing is not steamed or the dresser drawers open in the background or like it's just not quite as polished as what the
Yeah.
creative team or the brand team usually wants to see. And my response to that is if you can't find influencers that are on brand, you're not going to find customers that are on brand
Yeah.
either. And so really reinforcing that and then layering onto that, good brands they all have this statement of I'll use an example, when you're wearing Veronica Beard, you're going somewhere. And you're not going to find that slogan anywhere. But when you look at their website, you're going to see every single person is outside. They're taking a step. They're in motion. They're hailing a cab. And you start to then like have this aha moment where you're like, wow, anytime I see something from Veronica Beard, it looks like that person's going somewhere. And so having some when you're blank, your verb or adverb is super helpful because then you can start to tie back all of your creative to this underlying statement, not of who are we as a brand or as a company, but what are you saying about yourself when you purchase from us or when you work with us? And knowing what that statement is, like I'm going to misspeak for our marketing team, but when you're using measured, you're ahead of the curve. Something like that you're cutting edge, whatever. I don't know what measured is, but we should refine it to be something like that and then bring that through all of our marketing. That's what creates a really strong brand voice and what opens up. Creative can be so expensive and creative can be
Yep.
so hard to get and make. And if you just have one pass fail rule, essentially, that delineates if something is on brand or off brand, it will make it much easier for you to get the creative volume that you need. And then I really like the rule one creative concept per $10,000 in ad spend. So, and that's per month. So you'll have
Yep.
some ads that continue to work for a few months in some cases, depending on the business, and then just adding per one creative concept per 10 grand, and then making sure that your concepts are truly different concepts, not just different layouts or different rehashes of the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's super interesting. What are you seeing with them? You mentioned about user generated content at the beginning as well, and how, and I think it's really interesting what you're saying about the adverb. That's like it ties it together, doesn't it? If like,
Mhm.
okay, someone can be very different, it mightn't be polished, but if you have the same adverb and the context, people can make that relation then, even subconsciously, then when they see the brand. But what do you see with brands now that are working well with user generated content and creators? How are they managing to measure that effectively? Bottom line, then, or is it something whereby it's still in its infancy? Because we spoke with Jared Carson from Adobe recently.
Mhm.
He was talking about how it's for how they work with creators and they can tie it back to revenue and stuff. But I just wondered from what you see in the B2C space, how or what are the challenges around that kind of, because I guess it's reach and but how are you seeing that they're actually able to tie that to business impact as well?
Yeah, so a couple ways. The easiest way is when your influencer program is run through an affiliate platform like Impact or Rakuten, Commission Junction, whatever, any
Yeah.
one of those players. Then it's very easy to pull that data into your media mix model. Incrementality testing just cannot be done on that tactic. But the good thing about a media mix model is every test calibrates all of the other pieces of the pie accordingly. So maybe you can't test affiliate, but you can test all of the others and then
Yeah.
and knowing how much of the pie the affiliate is. The other way to do it is if you're doing larger partnerships where you're not running it through an affiliate partnership, passing that data back to measured or your agile media mix and having them put that data into the model. And if you have a good transparent model, that's totally possible. We work with a lot of brands that have like celebrity partnerships. One brand just did like a Gordon Ramsay collab, and they pass us that data, and then we're able to show them how that interplays with the rest of their media mix and what halo effect, aka incremental
Yeah.
impact, it has across the rest of their channels. And so it's I wouldn't say it's easy to measure, but it's possible to measure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the overall, though, it's definitely a trend that's growing, obviously, every year. But from most of the research that you see, does it have an impactful result overall? Or is it more like it shouldn't be seen as a one-off? It should be seen as something that's part of the overall media play, like not as a one-off, but more of like as a continuous thing so that people associate that person with the brand.
Yeah. So it can work very effectively. It's really important that the partner that you choose has strong overlap with your target addressable market. I've seen some really cool partnerships, but where it's just like, well, no one in your audience knows who that person
Yeah,
is. Maybe if you had a Gen Z audience,
yeah,
that would be a perfect overlap. But no marketing works in a vacuum, right?
yeah,
You do have to have a holistic approach. And I've seen that consistency of working with partners lends credibility. I think one of the downsides, there's guy's phenomenal. But one of the downsides of it is that it creates a feeling of lack of authenticity. And I believe
yeah,
that that's one of the reasons why lo-fi content is beginning to shine so much. Because even when you
yeah,
see this AI UGC, it still looks a little bit prettier than real life. It's just like the
yeah.
people that use AI headshots. It's like, man, that's a really good photo of you. Just a little bit prettier than you.
Yeah, 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 yeah. 100%. Yeah.
And that's how all that content is as well, I believe. And so having that really raw take can help bring credibility in the same way that a consistent partner over time. Like, I don't know if this will resonate with you, but a long time ago, back when The Bachelor was a really big thing, I think it was High Smile or some teeth whitening company just worked with every person who had ever been on the show. And it became very clear to everyone. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, it's not necessarily that these people believe in that. It's just they found an in with them and they pay enough that anyone's willing to post about them. And that's certainly not where you want your influencer program to end up.
Yeah, yeah, no, I suppose you want to have kind of the credibility with the audience and that the actual influencer believes in the product or something. I guess the George Clooney and Nescafe one is kind of like one of the one of the successful ones over the years as well.
Yeah.
Just one last question before we finish up. What are your predictions for the future measurement of, and now that's a super broad question, I know, but if we're to look forward in say 5 to 10 years time and we get closer in marketing, how we can actually measure business impact, what would you say are the levers as a marketing department that they can move towards that can actually align more with how finance do reporting, but also how marketing can be effective as well?
The first step would be to break down what most businesses call triangulation. And typically, triangulation means the CFO looks at last click, the media buyer looks in platform, and the analytics team or the CMO is looking at a platform like Measured. And so they call it triangulation of, hey, we're looking at these three data sources and seeing where they overlap to find the light. And
Yeah,
really what's happening is the CFO and the CMO are being pulled in two totally different directions.
yeah.
The media buyer is caught in between, just saying like, well, it looks really good in platform and these two people are telling me opposite things, so I'm just going to go with what the platform says. So I think the first step in seeing a better, clearer future is to stop triangulating and to bring together one real source of truth. Then the team feels confident in following. Because if you're relying on a blend of last click and platform and incrementality, it's just going to divide your team and cause confusion, and then also cause a lot of shifts in strategy that aren't doing anyone any good. So that's where I think we need to move first. And MTA is part of that conversation as well, because it starts to solve a little bit of the last click, but it also still very highly undervalues top of funnel because you're just not able to recreate a customer journey in the way that you were like pre iOS 14 way back in the
Yeah,
day.
yeah. But when you say MTA, what?
A multi-touch attribution.
Ah, of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. Of
So where
course.
you're
Yeah,
still using cookies and
yeah,
pixels to try and recreate a breadcrumb trail.
yeah,
And Unfortunately, there have been way too many birds and animals in the breadcrumb trail, and it's just not going to take you where you want it to anymore.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of limitations for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
this was really interesting. I learned a lot, and it was a pleasure to talk with you. If anyone wants to find you online, where you share content, or where do you normally where do you normally post the most, or where are you most present?
I'm most present on LinkedIn. I've tried to start posting on Twitter/X a bit more, but I've fallen off there. But yeah, I post pretty frequently on LinkedIn and would love to connect with anyone who's interested in nerding out about this a bit more. A lot of my most recent rants are all about marginal incremental return on ad spend, how to spot them, how to leverage them, and then media planning accordingly.
Great. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting topic. So thanks again for joining us today, Jarah. And it was great to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for your time.